AITA for letting my GF get disrespected by teenagers. All right, guys, let me take you through a day that changed everything I thought I knew about relationships and about myself. It's one of those moments you don't see coming, but when it hits, it shakes you to your core. So picture this. I'm out with my girlfriend, Olivia. We're just trying to enjoy a peaceful day at the park, but things take a turn when a group of teenagers nearby starts throwing disrespectful comments our way. You ever have that moment where your body freezes, but your mind races a mile a minute? Yeah, that was me. It wasn't just harmless jokes, they were crossing a line. And in that instant, I had to decide. Do I stand up and protect the person I care about, or do I let it slide and hope it goes away? What I did next surprised even me, and it changed everything. Introduction. Now, let's take it back to where it all began. It was just another Saturday, nothing out of the ordinary. My girlfriend Olivia and I had decided to spend the afternoon at the local park. You know, one of those classic couple days, packed a small picnic, found a nice spot under a tree, and just wanted to enjoy some quiet time together. We were both in great spirits. The sun was out, the breeze was light, and everything felt perfect. Honestly, it was one of those days where you think, yeah, I could get used to this. We had our blankets spread out, some sandwiches, and of course, her favorite snack, cheese crackers. It felt like nothing could ruin that moment. But as we sat there, laughing and just soaking in the day, I noticed a group of teenagers hanging out nearby. At first, they were just laughing and hoofing around, doing what teenagers do. I didn't think much of it. But slowly, I started noticing that they kept looking over at us, whispering to each other, and then laughing louder. I brushed it off at first. I mean, we're in a public park. People glance at each other, no big deal. But soon, those glances turned into something more. It was subtle at first, just whispers that I could barely make out, but then they got louder. One of them, this tall kid in a snapback, started making comments. Not just random jokes, but ones that had an edge to them. And that's when I caught one of the comments that made my stomach drop. Look at that couple over there. Man, she could do so much better. It was like a punch in the gut. Hearing something like that about the person you love. It hits differently. I glanced over at my girlfriend, and in an instant, I saw her whole mood shift. The smile that had been on her face just moments before faded. She tried to brush it off, but I could see it. Those words stung her too. I sat there, feeling this mix of emotions boiling up inside me. Part of me wanted to laugh it off, pretend like it didn't bother me. But another part of me, the part that cared about her deeply, was angry. Angry at those kids for saying something like that, and angry at myself for not knowing what to do in that moment. Do I stand up and say something? Do I ignore it and hope they stop? My mind was racing, but my body was frozen. And with every second that passed, I could feel my girlfriend getting more uncomfortable. The tension between us was growing, even though we weren't saying a word to each other. It was like we were both silently asking, "What now?" And then, just as I was trying to figure out what to do next, things escalated even more. Rising action. So, there we were, sitting on our blanket, trying to salvage what had been a perfectly good day. But the atmosphere had already shifted. You could feel it in the air, thicker, heavier. That group of teenagers? They weren't letting up. The comments started coming more frequently, and each one felt sharper than the last. Now, I've never been one to pick a fight, and normally I can let things slide. But when you hear someone disrespecting the person you care about right in front of you, it's a whole different story. It felt personal. And the worst part? I could see it was really starting to bother my girlfriend. She's strong, though, the kind of person who usually lets things roll off her back. But I could see her trying to hold it together, pretending it wasn't affecting her as much as it actually was. Her eyes would drift down to the ground whenever she heard them laughing. She was trying to act like it didn't matter, but I knew better. You can't hide that kind of hurt. And me? I was sitting there feeling like the world's biggest coward. My heart was pounding, my palms were sweaty, and I felt this rising pressure in my chest. I knew I should do something, anything, to make this stop. But I was frozen, You ever have that feeling where you're torn between wanting to stand up for what's right and being terrified of how things might escalate if you do? That was me, right in the middle of it. And I hated myself for it. I kept glancing over at my girlfriend, hoping she wouldn't look at me with disappointment in her eyes. I didn't want her to see me like this. Unsure, hesitant, afraid. But I knew she could feel it. The longer I sat there, doing nothing, the more I felt like I was letting her down. The group wasn't backing off. They just kept at it, throwing jabs our way, thinking it was all a joke. You could hear it in their tone. Half laughing, half serious, but it was clear they weren't just messing around anymore. It had turned into something meaner, something that was starting to cut deep. And then it happened. One of the girls in the group, trying to impress her friends, shouted, "Hey, why don't you just go back to your mom's basement?" The group erupted in laughter. It was loud, piercing. And that was the moment I saw it, the moment my girlfriend's face went from hurt to something else. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was embarrassment, maybe even shame. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. That broke me. I could feel my body moving before my brain caught up. My legs were shaky, but I stood up. The blanket rustled beneath me as I took a step forward. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. It wasn't like I had a plan. I just knew I couldn't sit there anymore, watching her feel that way. I walked toward the group, my fists clenched tight by my sides. Every step felt like I was walking through mud, slow, heavy. But I wasn't backing down this time. I got close enough to them, close enough that they couldn't ignore me, and with a shaky voice, I said, "Hey, can you just back off? That's really disrespectful." The words felt foreign coming out of my mouth, like they belonged to someone else. I wasn't used to confrontation like this, and honestly, I was scared. But I didn't let it show. I couldn't. For a moment, everything went quiet. The group stopped laughing. The tall guy in the snapback, the one who had been leading the charge, looked me up and down. He smirked, like he couldn't believe I'd actually said something. "What's it to you, man? It's just a joke." My heart was racing. I wanted to say something clever, something that would put him in his place, but all I could think about was my girlfriend standing behind me watching this unfold. I didn't want to let her down, not again. So I stood my ground, even though my knees felt like they were about to give out. Just when I thought I couldn't handle the silence anymore, my girlfriend stepped forward. She wasn't standing behind me anymore, she was standing beside me. And with this calm but powerful voice, she said, "You think making fun of people is funny? That's really sad." The guy's smirk faltered for a second. He wasn't expecting that. None of them were. For a brief moment, the power dynamic shifted. It wasn't me against them. It was us, together. And in that moment, I felt a surge of pride for her. This quiet, powerful strength, she had that I hadn't fully appreciated before. The teenagers were thrown off. You could see it in their faces. They didn't expect us to stand up to them. But the tension was still thick in the air. I could tell they weren't going to back down completely, not yet. I knew we needed to get out of there. I turned to my girlfriend and said, "Let's go." She nodded, and without another word, we grabbed our things and left the park. As we walked away, my heart was still racing, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was from this new understanding, this deepened connection we had just forged. We had each other's backs. But even though we had left the situation, the emotions were still raw. I knew we had to talk about what had just happened. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had let her down, even though I had eventually stood up for her. Climax. As we walked away from that park, the weight of what had just happened hit me all at once. My heart was still pounding in my chest, but it wasn't from the confrontation anymore. It was from this overwhelming rush of emotions: anger, guilt, regret, and something else I couldn't quite put my finger on. We didn't say much to each other at first. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, but it was heavy. I could feel the tension, not just from what had happened with those teenagers, but from what I hadn't done. I kept replaying the whole scene in my head. How I had hesitated, how I had frozen when I should have stood up for her right away. The more I thought about it, the more I felt like I had failed her. I glanced over at my girlfriend, Olivia. She was walking beside me, her head down, lost in her own thoughts. And that's when the guilt really started to settle in. I knew she was upset, and I couldn't help but think it was because of me. Not just because of what the teenagers had said, but because I hadn't acted sooner. I had let her down. After a few minutes of walking, I finally broke the silence. "Hey," I said quietly, "I'm so sorry. I should have stepped in sooner. I should have done something the moment they started making those comments." She looked up at me, her eyes soft but tired. "It's okay," she said, her voice calm. "I get it. It wasn't easy. But, yeah, I wish you had said something sooner." And there it was, the truth I had been dreading. I had known it all along, but hearing her say it out loud made it feel so much more real. I could see the hurt in her eyes, the disappointment. She wasn't angry with me, but I could tell she was disappointed, and that was worse. I felt like I had let her down in the moment she needed me most. I didn't know what to do, I admitted. I was scared that if I said something, it would make things worse, or that they wouldn't stop, or that I don't know. I froze, and I'm sorry for that. I'm really sorry. She nodded, taking a deep breath. "I know, and I understand. But it still hurt, hearing them say those things and then waiting for you to say something. I felt like I was all alone for a minute. That last sentence hit me hard. All alone. That's exactly what I had made her feel. In my hesitation, I had left her to face those cruel comments by herself. I could feel this wave of shame wash over me, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. "I'm so sorry," I said again, my voice barely of a whisper. "I never wanted you to feel that way." She sighed softly and reached for my hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "I know, and I appreciate that you eventually did say something. I need you to understand how it felt in the moment." I nodded, squeezing her hand back. "I do, I really do. And I promise, if something like that ever happens again, I won't hesitate. I'll stand up for you right away." There was a long pause, and in that silence, I realized something important. This wasn't just about standing up to those teenagers. It was about something bigger. It was about how we protect each other, not just physically, but emotionally. It was about making sure that in those moments when the world tries to tear you down, the person you love is there to lift you up. No hesitation. "I want to be better," I said after a moment. "Not just in situations like this, but in general. I want to be better at being there for you, at showing you that I've got your back no matter what. I don't ever want you to feel like you're facing things alone." She looked at me, and for the first time since we left the park, she smiled, a small, soft smile, but a smile nonetheless. "You're already better," she said. "The fact that you're even saying this, that you care enough to want to improve, that's what matters to me. We're going to face tough situations, but as long as we're honest with each other, we'll be okay." Her words brought me a sense of relief, but they also brought clarity. I had been so focused on the fact that I hadn't acted fast enough, but what really mattered to her was that I cared, that I was willing to grow from this. She wasn't looking for perfection, she was looking for effort, and that's something I could give her. As we continued walking, the conversation shifted. We started talking about what respect really means in a relationship, how it's not just about standing up for each other in public, but about being there for each other in all the small, everyday ways. It's about listening, understanding, and supporting one another, even when things get tough. And in that moment, I realized something else. This wasn't just about the teenagers at the park. This was about how I show up for her in every aspect of our relationship. It was about learning to be more aware of her feelings, more attuned to what she needs from me, and more proactive in showing her that I care. We kept walking, hand in hand, and I felt this strange sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't that the situation had been resolved perfectly, but it had brought us closer. We'd have faced something difficult together, and we had come out stronger on the other side. Falling action. After that heady conversation, we kept walking in silence for a bit, hand in hand. The weight of what had happened was still there, but it felt different now, less tense, more clear. It was like we had just peeled back a layer in our relationship that hadn't been exposed before. And it wasn't just about what had happened with those teenagers. It was about everything we had talked about afterward, about what it means to truly support each other. As we walked, I kept thinking about how I had reacted, or rather, how I hadn't reacted in time. I knew that this wasn't the kind of situation you planned for, but it still didn't feel great knowing that I had hesitated when I should have acted. It wasn't just about standing up to a group of kids in the park. It was about standing up for her, for us, for what we meant to each other. I realized I'd been so caught up in worrying about how things might go wrong that I hadn't thought about what it meant to just be there for her in that moment. We eventually made our way back to my place, and I could feel the exhaustion settling in, not just physical, but emotional. It was like we had been through this intense, unplanned emotional roller coaster, and now, all I wanted was to sit down and really process everything. As soon as we got inside, I made us both a cup of tea. It was something simple, but it felt grounding, like we needed something to bring us back to normal after such a charged afternoon. We sat on the couch, sipping our tea in silence for a bit, before she finally spoke up. "You know," she began, her voice softer now, "what happened today, it really made me think about how we handle things together." She paused, taking a sip of her tea before continuing. "I know that neither of us wanted that to happen, and it wasn't a situation you could have prepared for, but I'm glad we talked about it." I nodded, feeling the same. "Yeah, me too," I said. "I feel like it opened up a conversation we probably needed to have. Not just about that moment, but about how we handle things as a couple." She smiled a little, nodding in agreement. "Exactly. I don't think this was just about standing up to those kids. It was about understanding each other better, about knowing what we need from each other in tough situations." She paused again, as if searching for the right words. "I don't expect you to be perfect, but I do need to know that we're in this together. That when things get hard, we have each other's backs." Her words hit me deeply. It wasn't about me being a hero or doing everything right in the moment. It was about being present, about showing up for her in a way that made her feel secure and valued. And honestly, that's all I wanted too, to know that no matter what, we were a team. "I get that," I replied. "And I'm really glad we're talking about this. I know I didn't handle things perfectly today, but I want you to know that I'm learning from this. I want to be the kind of partner who's there for you, no matter what's going on." She reached over and placed her hand on mine, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You are that partner," she said softly. "We're both learning. This isn't about one moment. It's about how we move forward from here." That conversation felt like a turning point. It wasn't just about what had happened in the park anymore. It was about how we communicated, how we supported each other in those moments of uncertainty. It made me realize that standing up for someone isn't always about confronting the... In the quiet, I found myself thinking about the future, about how we handle situations like this in the years to come. And for the first time in a while, I felt hopeful. Not because I thought everything would be easy from here on out, but because I knew that whatever came our way, we face it together. We were stronger now, more aware of each other's needs, more attuned to how we could support each other. As the evening went on, the conversation shifted to lighter things. Plans for the week, what we'd watch on Netflix later. It felt good to laugh again, to share those simple, everyday moments that make up the foundation of a relationship. But even as we moved on from the heaviness of the day, I knew that something had changed. We were different now, stronger, more connected. That day at the park had tested us, but in the end, it brought us closer. And as we sat there, side by side, I realized that this was what it meant to be in a relationship, to face the tough moments, to learn from them, and to come out the other side stronger than before. Resolution. In the days following that afternoon at the park, I found myself thinking more and more about what had happened. Not just the confrontation itself, but the deeper meaning behind it. That day had been a wake-up call in a lot of ways. It wasn't just about standing up to some teenagers who were being rude. It was about what it meant to stand up for the person you care about, even when you're scared, unsure, or caught off guard. I kept replaying the moment in my head, how I had hesitated, how I had been frozen in place, unsure of what to do. And while I knew it wasn't realistic to expect myself to always have the perfect reaction in every situation, I couldn't help but feel like I could have done better. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it wasn't just about what I could have done in that moment. It was about how I could grow from this experience, how I could become more aware of my role in the relationship, and how I could make sure my girlfriend never felt like she was standing alone in situations like that again. One of the biggest things I took away from that day was the importance of communication. It was easy to think that standing up for someone was all about big gestures, about saying the right thing in the heat of the moment or stepping in at just the right time. But the reality was, standing up for someone starts long before those moments ever happen. It starts with being present, with listening, with understanding what the other person needs from you, not just in the good times, but in the hard times too. My girlfriend and I had always had a strong relationship, but this incident showed me that there was always room to grow, to deepen that connection. It wasn't just about making sure she felt protected in public. It was about making sure she felt heard, respected, and valued every day. And that meant being more mindful, more proactive in showing her that I was there for her, not just in moments of conflict, but in the little moments too. In the week that followed, we had more conversations about what had happened that day. They weren't heavy or dramatic like they had been immediately afterward, but they were thoughtful, reflective. We talked about how we could support each other better, how we could communicate more openly when things felt off, and how we could make sure that neither of us ever felt like we were facing something alone. One night, as we sat on the couch watching TV, she turned to me and said, I'm really proud of how we handled that whole thing. I know it wasn't perfect, but I feel like it brought us closer. I feel like I understand you better now, and I feel like we're more connected because of it." Hearing her say that made me realize just how far we had come in such a short time. The situation that could have easily driven a wedge between us had instead become a moment of growth, a chance for us to strengthen our bond and learn more about each other. And I think that's what relationships are all about. They're not just about the easy, happy moments. They're about how you handle the tough times, how you grow together through the challenges, and how you come out stronger on the other side. I also realized that this wasn't just a lesson about my relationship with her, it was a lesson about myself. I had always thought of myself as someone who would stand up for the people I cared about, but that day had shown me that I had more growing to do. And that was okay. No one is perfect, and no one gets it right every time. What mattered was that I was willing to learn from it, to acknowledge where I had fallen short, and to make sure that next time I'd be more prepared, not just for her, but for myself too. As the days turned into weeks, the memory of that confrontation at the park started to fade, but the lessons we had learned from it stayed with us. We found ourselves being more intentional about how we communicated with each other, more aware of how our actions, or inactions, could affect the other person. And in a way, I was grateful for that experience, as difficult as it had been in the moment, because it had opened up a new level of understanding between us. There were times when I still felt a twinge of regret about not standing up sooner, about not immediately stepping in when those kids had started making their comments. But every time I started to feel that way, I reminded myself that relationships aren't about being perfect. They're about being present, about learning from the moments when you fall short, and about growing together through the challenges. One night, a couple of weeks after the incident, we were out for dinner, just enjoying each other's company. The restaurant was packed, full of chatter and laughter. But in that moment, it felt like it was just the two of us. As we sat there, talking about our day, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed since that afternoon in the park. We had always been close, but now there was this new level of trust between us, this unspoken understanding that we had each other's backs, no matter what. As we finished our meal, I looked at her and said, "I just want you to know I'm really grateful for you, for how you've handled everything, for being patient with me, and for helping me grow. I feel like we're stronger because of it." She smiled, reaching across the table to take my hand. "I feel the same way," she said softly. "And I know that no matter what happens, we'll always have each other's backs." That moment summed up everything I had learned from that experience. It wasn't just about standing up to a group of kids at the park. It was about standing up for each other every day in the small ways and the big ones. It was about showing up, being present, and being willing to grow together, even when things get tough. As we left the restaurant that night, walking hand in hand, I realized that this was what love really looked like. It wasn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about the quiet, everyday ways we show each other that we care. It was about learning from our mistakes, growing from our experiences, and becoming better, not just for ourselves, but for the person we love. And in the end, that's what mattered most. We had faced a challenge together, and we had come out the other side stronger, more connected, and more committed to each other than ever before. Call to action. All right, guys, that's my story. It's crazy how something as simple as a day at the park can turn into a lesson about standing up for the people you love and growing stronger in a relationship. We don't always get it right in the moment, but what really matters is how we learn from those experiences and show up for each other. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt like you didn't act fast enough or the way you wanted to? How did you handle it afterward? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear your stories. And if you found this video helpful or relatable, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more personal stories and lessons on relationships, growth, and life. We've all got a lot to learn from each other, so let's keep the conversation going. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.